Welcome to the GSMC Car Podcast, the show that takes you on a journey to the automotive world. We talk about the latest news, from new makes and models to new technology to all of the must-have options available. Whether you're a fan of the old classics, love the latest models and technology, or have never met a vehicle you didn't want to work on, the GSMC Car Podcast has something for every car enthusiast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Car Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, David Lucy Mabel. All right, today, folks, first of all, I want to say happy holidays, because this is the holiday season, so our podcasts are not going to be going up at the regular times that they would typically be going up. Typically, I have a podcast that comes out on Wednesday and on Saturday, but during the holiday season, this week of Christmas and this week of New Year's, we are going to be uploading them on Wednesday and Wednesday alone. So happy holidays. Hope you all are staying safe. Hope you all are doing well, and hope you all are enjoying the podcast for those of you who are active listeners. Today we're going to be talking about a car that is extremely special, an extremely special vehicle that frankly is not very common, but nonetheless I love it, and every time I see it, I always have to take a second and gawk at it, just like I don't know, some schoolboy or something. But today we're going to be talking about the Chevy SS, and we're going to be talking about why it failed. The Chevy SS was produced from 2013 to 2017. But before I get into all of that, we're going to be talking about the origins of the Chevy SS. We are going to be talking about the competitors. We're going to be talking about the downfall of Holden, which you would say, for those of you who are not privy to the Chevy SS, what does Holden have to do with any of it? Holden is an Australian car company, so what does that have to do with it? And, of course, in segment 4, we are going to be talking about my personal thoughts on the Chevy SS. So, yes, back to what I was saying. The Chevy SS was produced from 2013 to 2017 for 4 model years. It was a rebadged Holden Commodore from Australia, and it filled the void of the Pontiac G8, itself a rebadged Commodore of the previous generation. So both the Pontiac G8 and the Chevy SS were Holden Commodores that were brought over to the United States. They were captive imports, meaning that they were imported from another country under the same company, essentially. Kind of like the Mercury Scorpio was a Ford Scorpio from Europe. It was brought over to the United States by Ford. It's the same difference with the G8 and the SS. Essentially, what was going on here is that they were built on the same platform, and I truly believe if Pontiac had not, gone the way of the Dodo, then this Chevy SS would have just been a second generation Pontiac G8. But anyway, moving on, it was a V8 rear-wheel drive sports sedan, keeping with the Australian tradition and love for large, sporty sedans. The Australians seem to have a love affair with large, sporty 4-door sedans. And that is something that I absolutely love, because even though my car wouldn't be considered sporty, but I do drive a Buick Park Avenue Ultra, which is a larger 4-door sedan with a performance bent to it. I mean, granted, it only has 240 horsepower. It's a V6. It's front-wheel drive. How sporty can it possibly get? It can't really get that sporty. But considering the sheer lack of sporty 4-door sedans we have in the American car market, I would say this was at least supposed to be a smart idea on GM's part, bringing over a large sports sedan from Australia, especially considering that we have a severe lack of it. Because think of it, we've had the Mercury Marauder, large four-door rear-wheel drive sports sedan, and we've had the Chevy Impala SS, large rear-wheel drive sports sedan. And we're not talking about the most recent Impala SS. We're talking about the Impala SS from 1994 to 1996 here. Other than that, I would say we have Chrysler products, the Dodge Charger and the Chrysler 300C Hemi. Those are four that I can name off the top of my head that have come out in the last 20 years in the American car market, aside from the G8 and the SS. That's not very many, to tell you the truth. Full-size, four-door sedans, rear-wheel drive, and, performance oriented. That's not a huge amount. And I don't know why exactly the American car tastes never evolved to be so appreciative of a large four-door sports sedan. I mean, the Germans have large four-door sports sedans. You get, I wouldn't consider this super sporty, but you get the S65 AMG. I mean, that's a sporty vehicle. Granted, it's very large. And at that point, it's not so much about the performance. It's more about, smoothness and straight line speed and whatnot. But I mean, the S65 AMG packs a punch. Granted, that's extremely expensive. That's, hundreds of thousands of dollars. You get, things like the Alpina B7 or, BMW 7 Series, the Sports Series. I mean, those can fetch a lot of money. We're not talking about any regular sports sedans here. All of the ones that we're talking about that offered in America may not be American cars, but they are also extremely luxurious and extremely expensive. For example, you get the Bentley Continental GT, or Bentley Continental Flying Spur, I should say. Is that really a sports sedan? I mean, it has the performance. Maybe not the handling. Maybe it's not specifically meant to be a sports sedan, but at that price range, things you're gonna have a lot of speed in them anyway. But as far as the Americans themselves go, from the big three, Chrysler, Ford, and GM, I think Chrysler is the only one that has not neglected this segment. I mean, Chrysler has consistently offered affordable four-door rear-wheel drive sports sedans. That's very odd that Chrysler would prevail over GM and Ford in a specific segment. But they have. I mean, Ford didn't bring over their Falcon from Australia. Ford had the Marauder for a few years, but then after that, that went the way of the dodo, and they never came back with a rear-wheel drive sports sedan again. I mean, not a full-size one at least. I mean, the Lincoln LS back in the early 2000s, but then again, goodness, that also wasn't a full-size sedan. That was a mid-size sedan. So, I don't know. It's just, I don't even know exactly what I'm trying to say here. It's disappointing. It's disappointing that this has been such a neglected segment. But then, now that you think of it, this also contributes to the reason why the Chevy SS was not a successful vehicle. It has the same LS3 V8 from the Corvette of the time period. And just like I'm going to mention again, this sounds exactly like the Chevy Impala SS from the 1990s. That was also rear-wheel drive, and that had the 5.7-liter LT1 engine, also from the Corvette, that was shared among the B-body cars of the time period. That was shared in the Cadillac Fleetwood. That was shared in the Buick Roadmaster. That was shared in the Chevy Impala SS, which was basically a performance version of the Chevy Caprice. It was built on the same platform and looked, similar enough that you can see that there was a resemblance. Granted, this was, a lot more sport-oriented, tuned suspension, different wheels, different front fascia, different rear fascia, but it was basically same size and shape as the Chevy Caprice of the time period. And I believe that you could also get the Chevy Caprice ordered with a 260 horsepower LT1 engine. I don't think that came standard, though. I think you had to upgrade that too. You had to upgrade to that. But, that's it. I mean, the Chevy SS was really a holdout in the American car market that wasn't very friendly to large rear-wheel drive sports sedans. This car was related and is essentially the brother to the Camaro, which is not something I knew. I did not know that the Camaro was related to the Holden Commodore, or in this case, in America, the Chevy SS. Apparently, it's built on a larger platform. Obviously, because it's a four-door sedan, not a two-door coupe, but it is basically the same car underneath. Which is not something that I knew, which I find that sort of odd, because Camaro sales way, way, way outshine the sales of the Chevy SS, which it's like, I understand that Americans like muscle cars, but muscle cars aren't very practical. You would think that they would offer a version of a muscle car that is practical, and then more people would eat it up, because it seems that everybody is going more towards practicality these days. I mean, people want crossovers. People want, sort of lifted wagons. People want something that's a bit more practical. I mean, I would imagine the more practical the vehicle, the easier it is to sell. So in that case, you get, like, I don't know. It's like, I would imagine a coupe wouldn't sell nearly as well as a sedan. A sedan wouldn't sell as much as a station wagon. A station wagon wouldn't sell as much as an SUV. SUV wouldn't sell as much as a minivan. But it doesn't seem to work that way. It's sort of counterintuitive. Everybody's just moving away from sedans. And it gets to the point where you have to wonder, do Americans just not like sedans? Is it not even a practicality sort of standpoint? Is it just a simple dislike of sedans? Do they just not like them? Because that's the only thing that can occur to me as to why the Chevy SS did not sell. On paper, this car should have sold. And I don't think GM would have wasted the money to have a car built in Australia, imported to the United States, if they thought that it wouldn't have sold. GM is not, GM used to do some stupid things, but GM is not stupid nowadays. GM wouldn't, do, foolishness like that. I mean, yeah, with the Cadillac Alante, they had it built over in Italy, and then had special Boeing planes outfitted to bring the bodies over to the United States so they can be mated with the North Star engine at the time that they did have the North Star engine. Before it was like a 4.9 liter. But point is, they had them mated to an engine and their chassis here in the United States to be sold under the Cadillac name. I mean, that was kind of dumb. I mean, there was no way did they think that they were going to make a profit off of those cars. But this, I mean, the Chevy SS was affordable. I mean, it wasn't your $20,000 off the lot affordable, but compared to some of the other cars at this performance point, this was an affordable vehicle. And Ford wasn't really offering anything to combat it. And the only car that was really offering anything as sort of a competition was from Chrysler, that you will learn about more in the next segment. And Chrysler, dang, man, Chrysler's not worth competing against anymore, because all of their things are horribly outdated and old-fashioned, and for some, I don't even know how they even still sell at this point, frankly. I mean, I think it's just a bunch of hubris on Chrysler's part. Like, oh, we're proud, we're not going to be changing our vehicles, so we're just going to keep them the way they are, and people are going to keep on buying them. I mean, like, okay, so what? Like, doesn't mean, I get it, if it's not broke, don't fix it, but like, at some point you gotta keep up with the times. And frankly, the thing is, it might be hubris, or it might be just the plain fact that Chrysler's just running out of money and they don't have time and they don't have the resources to redesign their lineup from the ground up. I mean, that could be the reason why too. And granted, this was also, at this point, 7 years ago that the Chevy SS came out, and it went out of production 3 years ago. So, I mean, this is not necessarily the most recent thing that's happened in the car world. But, I just don't understand why captive import from Australia doesn't work here in the United States. It should work. It should work, and the fact that it doesn't work is ever so slightly irritating, frankly. I think Americans just need to, wake up and, smell the coffee and realize that crossovers are not the only vehicles offered for sale, and that, their love affair with crossovers, which are really a mutt of a vehicle. Because honestly, I should probably do a podcast on crossovers at some point. Before I end this segment, let me just tell you what a crossover is. Okay, a crossover is basically an SUV built on a car platform. Which, the notion of which, on paper, sounds absolutely ridiculous. I mean, think of what an SUV is. An SUV is like a pickup truck and a minivan had a baby, and this is their baby. That's the space of a minivan and the utility of a pickup truck. So now you've got minivan plus pickup truck to make SUV. Then you got SUV plus car to make crossover. The whole formula is so convoluted. It's just so complicated. I mean, I don't know why they can't just stick with a sedan. Because the thing is, you get some people who are driving crossovers. It's the same phenomenon as people who drive pickup trucks. The vast majority of them don't need that space. They don't need that ground clearance. They don't need the utility that a crossover offers. They just want it because that's what everybody else wants. And that's sort of the sheep mentality that I can't really deal with as far as the car market goes. I mean, people have lost their uniqueness. The car market has lost its uniqueness. I mean, you think 50 years ago, boy, was there a variety of cars that you can buy. And nowadays, you're relegated to basically crossovers. I mean, if you don't want a crossover, then you have to, you can buy a sedan, but the sedans in the American market are severely limited. I mean, you can't buy a brand new sedan from Ford anymore. You can buy a brand new sedan from GM, but it would have to be a Cadillac. And that's just disappointing. It's disappointing. And, it's because of the dumb tastes of the American car market that has really killed the Chevy SS, a car that should have never been killed, a car that should have been successful. But please stay tuned for the next segment in which I discuss the competitors, or the lack thereof, of the Chevy SS. So please stay tuned after the break.
Are you a business owner? Someone interested in the latest news that might affect your business? Then check out the GSMC Business News Podcast, a show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. The GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
All right, car people, welcome back. In the last segment, we discussed the origins of the Chevy SS, and I've begun to discuss why it had failed and why, frankly, that's kind of sad and sort of irritating for me. But here in this segment, we are going to be discussing the competitors, and stay tuned for the next segment after this one is over, because we're going to be talking about the downfall of Holden, which now you all know the Chevy SS is just a rebadged Holden Commodore. And now you can begin to understand the correlation here. What does Holden in Australia have to do with the Chevy SS here in America? So, moving on. There weren't really any true competitors to the Chevy SS in the United States, which is another reason why it should have been so successful. There was nobody else to really compete against it. I mean, this is something that, should have been like, whoa, you can get this fast sedan for an affordable amount. When I was doing research on this, and I saw how affordable the Chevy SS was, as far as you're getting a 4-door Corvette, for crying out loud. When I saw how affordable it was, I was shocked. I was taken aback. And the reason why I was shocked and I was taken aback was the simple fact was like, oh my goodness gracious, look at this wonderful vehicle. And I always assumed that the reason why I didn't see more of them was the fact that maybe they were overpriced and people didn't want to pay. No, they weren't overpriced. They were not overpriced. This is something that should have sold, and I struggle to wrap my head around it. Why didn't it sell? Why was it a flop? Why wasn't it successful? And why did GM kill it after 4 years? I mean, bruh, this is a 4-door Corvette we're talking about. Like, this is not your, your Buick Park Avenue Ultra, which the only thing that separates it from a regular Buick Park Avenue was the fact that they slapped an Eaton supercharger on it that was lazy to begin with and that only gave you like 40 more horsepower. No, we're talking about a 4-door Corvette here, people. This had the same engine as a Corvette and had the performance to back it up. Granted, as much as a 4-door car could. It's saddening. It's saddening, it's ridiculous, and it's dumbfounding. That's what it is. But the only one I can think of as far as competitors go is the Dodge Charger. Yeah, the Dodge Charger. Okay, like, you all know why I hesitate to say that afterward. Ford did not have a large rear-wheel drive sedan for the American market. Yeah, it just didn't happen. The Ford Motor Company had the Ford Taurus SHO, the Ford Taurus Show, which is a front-wheel drive V6 sedan. Granted, it packs a punch, but it's not the same thing as a rear-wheel drive with a large displacement V8. It just simply isn't. The only car I can think of in Ford's lineup that was a car, not a truck, not an SUV, not anything, that came with a V8 and rear-wheel drive during this time period is probably the Mustang. Because the GT has a turbocharged V6 in rear-wheel drive, and frankly, the GT doesn't compete with anything, because the GT, you can't buy a GT unless you're invited to buy a GT by Ford. And before you buy one, you have to sign a contract saying that you're not going to flip the car, that you're actually going to drive it. And so, yeah, that's kind of, the GT doesn't even, the GT shouldn't even be mentioned, frankly. And even if it was, it's not a sedan. So this is sort of the market that the Chevy SS went into. It's competing against the horribly antiquated Dodge Charger, which hasn't changed much over the past 10 years. And it's going in blindly. It doesn't know who it's competing against. Now, I said that this is a very, very good thing. This is a very good scenario. But at the same time, this could potentially be a problem. A car that goes into a market with no competitors can really be good, like I said earlier, or can really be bad. And it was bad in this case because the Chevy SS was more expensive than the Dodge Charger it competed against. Granted, the Chevy SS was not cheap. It was affordable, but it was not cheap. The Dodge Charger compared to the Chevy SS was cheap. And I feel like that could be one of the only reasons why. That could be one of the only reasons why this had become such a problem for GM to try to sell the Chevy SS. Here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that the demographic who buy these cars, these large four-door sedans, I mean, we're thinking, generally young single men who enjoy performance but want a little practicality out of their cars. Or maybe we're getting young, newly married men who still want to have fun with their cars, but know that eventually they might be wanting to start a family and they would need to haul their children around in their cars. That's the demographic you think of. I mean, I'm not trying to be sexist, but these are not women's cars. Women, per the demographics, per the statistics, don't gravitate towards, four-door, rear-wheel drive sports sedans. They don't gravitate towards that sort of vehicle. So this is something that men typically buy. Younger men who are looking for a bit more practicality out of their vehicles, but still want the performance and the speed that these things offer. Now, this is what I'm beginning to think. The demographic doesn't so much care about the latest technology and doesn't so much care even about build quality so much. The demographic cares simply about speed and performance, which is why I believe the Dodge Charger has far outsold the Chevy SS. And you have to think of it as well. There is styling. There's an argument for styling here too. The styling of the Dodge Charger is a lot more aggressive than the Chevy SS. The Chevy SS, if you look it up, is a lot more refined. It's a lot less aggressive and masculine looking than the Dodge Charger. And like I said, the demographic of these people who are buying these vehicles want their cars to look aggressive. They want their cars to look bold and brash and manly. They want all of that. They don't want their cars to be looking soft and refined. Is it linked to fragile masculinity? Perhaps. Probably, actually. But that's not the issue here. It's a car podcast, and we're going to be discussing cars. And if fragile masculinity sells goodness, then the car manufacturers are going to capitalize on that. And boy, that's what Dodge did. They offered this thing super loud exhaust in some cases. They offered it with like 800 horsepower in the Hellcat. I mean, like, they took the Dodge Charger and they ran with it in ways that I've never seen car companies run before. And has it sold? Yes, it has. Is it one of Chrysler's most successful vehicles despite the fact that it's horribly antiquated? Yes, it is. GM couldn't hold up. Because let me tell you, the SS started at $46,625, which when you granted, when you take, the Chevy Corvette, the Corvette starts at around $60,000, $70,000, maybe even $80,000. I don't know. It starts in the $60,000 to $80,000 range. You're getting a four-door Corvette, granted without the manual transmission, but you're getting a four-door Corvette for about, give or take $30,000 less. Now, let's think the Dodge Charger. The Dodge Charger, granted, came with a naturally aspirated V6 at the base point. But then again, people are looking for the appearance. People are looking for the performance, and a V6 is still a healthy engine. I mean, a V6 will still propel this thing, to healthy, respectable performance numbers. So it started out at $27,995. You're getting a sports sedan. You're getting two different approaches to an American sports sedan. You're getting one that's built here in North America. It might not be built in the United States. I believe they're built in Canada, but still. You're getting one that's built here in North America. And you're getting one that's built in Australia. I tell you, if GM had produced the Chevy SS here in North America, it would have been cheaper to produce, and it would have been cheaper to sell, and then more people would have bought it. That's one of the reasons why it failed. And you'll find out in the next podcast that Holden was experiencing a host of its own problems down under in Australia, which also affected Chevy SS production over here in the United States. And you'll find that if GM had just been, maybe had taken more of a risk and built them here in North America, they could still be competing against, Dodge's lineup of insane vehicles to this day. But unfortunately, that's not what they ended up doing. The Charger was king in that segment of American muscle sedans, so to speak. The Chevy SS was unknown and came in only one trim, really. You can option up, a Dodge Challenger, Dodge Charger all the way up to like the Hellcat, or you can do the Hemi, or you could do the RT, or there were so many different versions that you could do and you can get. I mean, the Chevy SS only came in one version, and people like to customize, people like to, option up their vehicles, and the Chevy SS only came in one version. And the Charger was a lot more versatile. Back to what I was saying, it not only was a lot more versatile, but it came with a lot more different options too. What I think is GM played it a bit too safe with the SS. They should have taken more of a risk. And you'll find out more in the next segment of this podcast, so please stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Okay, welcome back, car folks. In the last segment, we discussed the competitors, and we discussed basically the Dodge Charger and why it was a better alternative. I mean, not a better alternative, but a more affordable and a more popular alternative to the Chevy SS. Now we're going to consider the downfall of Holden in Australia, how that could have also contributed to the failure of such an amazing car. In order for one to talk about the failure of the Chevrolet SS, one must discuss Holden's demise. Holden used to make Australian cars independently before they started to make cars under GM. They did this in 1931. So give or take, for the past 89, almost 90 years now, Holden has been making cars under GM in Australia. They started out independently, but they've been making cars under GM for nearly 90 years now. The declining sales of large cars in Australia led to the announcement that GM would halt Australian production of cars in 2017. This was announced in 2013. Now, remember what I said about GM not doing stupid things? This is a stupid thing. Here's why I say it's a stupid thing. Because if you remember from the first podcast, you'll remember that GM produced the Chevy SS from what? 2013 to 2017. All right. They also announced that in 2013, they would be halting production of Australian-made Holden products in 2017. So during the time that they had begun to decline in sales, during the time that Holden had begun the process of shutting its doors and ceasing production of Australian cars, this was the same time that GM thought it was a great idea to bring out the Chevy SS and to produce it here in the United States, and to bring out another generation of the Holden Commodore down in Australia, while people knew that this was the beginning of the end for Holden. And that's infuriating. It's infuriating in such a sense is that they're giving you a car that they know is going to fail. They're giving you a car that you know the days are numbered in. They're giving you a car that they know that the days are numbered in, they know is going to fail, and they know is the beginning of the end of production. And here you have an amazing concept on paper, and you're just going to tease the American people with it. And it's like you're giving them false hope in a sense. It's like, oh, well, we've got this great car, and we want to offer it to you, but here at the same time, we're not going to give you enough time to really appreciate it before we kill it. If GM really wanted to do that, then what GM should have done is, like I said in the last segment, they should have ceased production of the Australian Holden Commodore and just taken up those same plans and offered them in a factory up in America and then started building it here. Building it here and making it in such a way that was going to be appealing to the American public. Because what really killed it was not the fact that the Dodge Charger was a better car. The Dodge Charger had more trim levels available. This is true. But the Dodge Charger, objectively, I will tell you, is a better car. Is not a better car by virtue of it being a Chrysler product. Chrysler products cannot hold a candle to any other American car product. Because Chrysler products are outdated, they're badly built, and they're unreliable. And that's common knowledge. And you will never stop hearing me harp about Chrysler. So here we are. We have Holden in Australia that is experiencing poor sales due to the decline in large car demand. And we've got the Chevy SS, which is a large performance car, a large performance sedan that is being produced as a Holden Commodore in Australia and being imported to the United States as a Chevy SS. We have this thing for its final generation just starting to go into production as GM has announced that it's going to begin to close the Australian operation of Holden. Does this make any sense? No, it doesn't. Was this sort of, a swan song from GM? As if though, oh, well, this is what we're going to do. This is nice, blah, blah, blah. All of this. No. It wasn't any of that. It wasn't any of that. It was just stupid. It was just stupid. Like, if you're going to do this and you're going to offer this and you're going to know that you have someone to beat, you have a competitor, even if it's not a very viable competitor, even though, it's not really a competitor in the truest sense. If you know that you have a market and you know that you have a car in that market that you have to beat, you have to do everything in your power to capitalize on that. What they should have done, they should have taken the plans from the Australian Holden Commodore, brought them to a factory here in America, had the factory retooled to produce the Chevy SS on American soil, and then what they should have done from there, they should have offered different trim levels of it. Because the thing is, GM had a lot of parts barrel cars. It had a lot of, the GM parts barrel was huge. They could have stuck a less powerful engine in it for a lower trim model, and then offered the top of the line engine, like, Cadillac Blackwing V8 or something in the top of the line model. I mean, there could have been, they had enough engines, they had enough parts available that they could have done something with this that would have made it a direct competitor against Chrysler's Dodge Charger. And to which case, I guarantee you the SS would have outsold. Because it's a better car, and because of GM's reputation for build quality and reliability as compared to Chrysler, they would have done a lot better. Unfortunately, that's not what ended up happening. Cadillac, I guess GM was focused on Cadillac's line of performance sedans, the V series, that they didn't want the Chevy SS to come over and to continue and to be a competitor to Cadillac's V series cars, which is a legitimate concern. You don't want internal competition inside of a company like GM. You don't want internal competition. And I feel like perhaps the reason why they didn't bring back the Chevy SS, they didn't bring it back after Holden had stopped producing Australian cars in 2017, which ultimately was the last nail in the coffin for the Chevy SS. They didn't bring it back, and they didn't focus on it, was the fact is that GM had begun to focus more and more on Cadillac's V-Series cars. Think of it. The Cadillac lineup at the time was going through a revamping. Instead of it being CTS, STS, XTS, blah, 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 all the TSs, it became CT4, CT5, and CT6. And the SUVs were going through a revamping as well. Instead of it being XRS, it became, Cadillac ST5, it became XT5, and it became Cadillac XT4, things, and XT6. There was a whole lineup change going on in Cadillac, from 2017 to the present day. So what I'm beginning to think was that GM used their resources to focus on Cadillac and to just let the Chevy SS, let bygones be bygones, essentially. It makes me sort of sad, but honestly, it makes sense. Because when you think that a Cadillac CTS-V sedan was similar price to a Chevy SS of the time period, it begins to make sense why this is something that GM wasn't taking extremely seriously, and why GM didn't want to continue production of the Chevy SS for fears that there could be internal competition from Cadillac. It would just make more sense for them to let it die along with the Australian production of Holden, because it was built in Australia anyway. It's all a question of money, and it's all a question of risk. Is the risk worth taking? Is the risk worth taking, and what's going to be our reward? Let's say if Cadillac had continued producing stuffy luxury sedans that they had done for the longest while, and were not focusing on sporty sedans. This would have been a perfect opportunity for GM to bring in a sporty sedan that they had that was good, that was very good, and that, as far as I'm concerned, had a great legacy in Australia. They could have done the same thing here in America. But it would have cost too much money to cease production in Australia, retool factories here in America to produce it on a large and a grand scale just to combat one model. because the model that it would have combated would have undoubtedly been the Dodge Challenger. That's in a perfect world. In a perfect world where you don't have to worry about public perception, you don't have to worry about the cost of these things, you don't have to worry about success, you're doing it purely for the passion. And this is why car companies are driven by economists and engineers. They are not driven by car enthusiasts. Because if car companies were driven by car enthusiasts, if car companies were headed by car enthusiasts, then the car scene would be a very, very different place. And frankly, car scene would not make so much money if it was driven by enthusiasts. Because enthusiasts, we operate off of emotion. We operate off of emotion above all else. We do not operate off of logic. If I had spoken to a GM executive and told them, well, you all should have let the Australian Holden company die, but you should have taken the plans for the Holden Commodore and then made it the Chevy SS here in America and built a factory. And they would be like, okay, how much does it cost to build a factory? Is the market looking for a large, sporty four-door sedan? Is the market looking for this? Is the market looking for that? And of course, the answer to all of that is no. You already find it that cars here in America are not selling very well. The things that are selling very well are crossovers, SUVs, and pickup trucks. Those are the things, those high ground clearance, more utilitarian vehicles. Those are the ones that are selling. It is not cars and coupes and other things of that sort. Those are not the things that are selling here in America. So, granted, you have that now. You have that, and then you have the fact that the Chevy SS is an Australian product, and the Australian company that produces it is failing, and they are about to close their doors. There was no hope. There was no hope. I mean, the only reason why I think GM even still offers sedans in Cadillac's lineup is the fact that Cadillac, since the rise of the German car companies in the late 70s, early to mid 80s, Cadillac has been trying very hard to combat the Germans, and now that Cadillac is finally getting close to them, they don't want to drop the ball now and cancel all the Cadillac sedans. But when you think of it, all of Buick's sedans have been canceled. The Buick LaCrosse doesn't exist anymore. The Buick Regal doesn't exist anymore. The Buick Verano doesn't exist anymore. All those rebadged Opels that they had from Europe don't exist anymore because Opel, fun fact, Opel is also going the way of Holden. They're not producing cars anymore, which is very sad. I don't even think Vauxhall is going to be producing cars anymore. Like, there's a lot of, overseas GM marks that are just going to die, which is the reason why there's a lot of, vehicles we had here in the United States that were actually based off of those vehicles, or some of them were just produced and then brought over to the United States. They're all just going to die too. I mean, Chevy, you might still be able to get a Chevy Spark. I mean, I don't even know if you can still get a Chevy Spark. I think all of the Chevy cars are dead too. I don't know if you can get a Malibu. I know the Impala is no longer a thing as of the end of this year. I mean, there's a lot of things that are just not being offered anymore. And I think the only reason why GM is continuing with sedans in Cadillac was the fact that the Germans are still very much alive and well in the sedan game, and Cadillac is the American alternative to the German cars as far as the luxury cars go. I think that's the only reason why they're continuing with it. So basically, the decline of Holden, this was announced in 2013, the same time that the Chevy SS was brought out. In February of this year, GM announced that they would be killing off Holden by the end of 2021, or by 2021, not even the end of 2021. So we're talking about in a few days here. We're talking about in a few days, in a few weeks, actually. 2021 is going to be upon us, and Holden will no longer be a thing. With the ceasing of the Australian production of cars, the SS went to. That was, the death of the SS, I will say, was untimely. Perhaps it wasn't untimely, but I'm going to say it was untimely. Or maybe it was just doomed from the start, in which you heard me say it earlier. I believe this thing was doomed from the start. And that's an unfortunate story to say the least. So please stay tuned for the next segment of the podcast in which I'm going to be discussing my own personal thoughts on the Chevy SS and why it failed. Please stay tuned.
Do you work in the world of marketing and advertising? Are you a media buyer or the owner of an agency? Have you been looking for a podcast to help stay on top of all the goings-on of those worlds? The GSMC Marketing News Podcast is dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning marketing and advertising. Get the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast has you covered, whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand.
All right, welcome back, folks. So, in the last segments, we discussed the origins of the Chevy SS. We discussed the competitors that the Chevy SS had here in America, and we discussed the downfall of Holden, which basically spelt the downfall of the Chevy SS as well, considering that it was an American captive import, built in Australia, sold under an American mark here in the United States. So here are my thoughts. I love the Chevy SS. I love anything that has to do with large performance sedans. I'm not so picky as them having to be rear-wheel drive. I don't care if they're manual. I just love the fact that large performance sedans exist. I have loved it then. I will always love it for the rest of my life. I mean, we're talking about cars like the Ford Taurus Show. I hate the Ford Taurus. The Ford Taurus Show, though, oh my gosh, I will kill to get my hands on one of those. I'm talking about cars, Buick Park Avenue Ultra. I mean, granted, it's not super performance-oriented, but that's the car I drive, so I'm going to put it on this list anyway. I'm talking about Cadillac DeVille DTS with 300 horsepower. I'm talking about Cadillac Seville STS, also with 300 horsepower. I'm talking about Pontiac G8. I'm talking about Chevy SS. I'm talking about Mercedes-Benz S65 AMG. I'm talking about the E63 AMGs, or whatever the number is now, the EAMG cars, the SAMG cars. I'm talking about the M5. I'm talking about large sedans with performance to back them up. You get performance to back up that size. Not only is it practical, but it's fast. I mean, if you can't get a fast wagon, man, get a fast sedan. It just speaks to everything that I love about cars. So the Chevy SS, every time I see one, I tell you I gawk over it. I have to take a moment to appreciate the car, because that's something that I would long to own one day. And not only that, it's an amazing vehicle, especially for the American market, especially for the modern times. You get something like that, it's not easy to come by something like that. Something that is so special, something that is so rare. Because it is rare. I mean, I think they sold like less than 5,000 a year or something. I think they sold like 20,000 in all. And I don't even know if it's even that much. I mean, the Chevy SS, a Corvette engine, 4 doors, rear-wheel drive. What else do you want? You don't need anything else. This is your car. This is a car that you don't need anything else if you own this car. It's practical. You can haul your family in it. You can beat Camaros off of the line. I mean, you can do anything you want with this vehicle, save for motocrossing it, in which that's not realistic because nobody does that anyway. I mean, this is what intrigues me. And this is what infuriates me, in a sense. Why is this a thing? Why do Americans not like these cars? I don't understand why Americans don't like these cars. There's nothing not to like about it. I mean, yeah, it's not fuel efficient, but heck, neither is the pickup truck you're going to go buy. And you know that you're going to go buy a pickup truck. You're buying it because your neighbor has a pickup truck. You're not buying it because you actually need it. So what's the big idea? What's the big idea? Why do you care? Why do you care so much about the fact that it's lower to the ground and it's not this and it's not what I want? It's not a truck. It's not a crossover. Like, oh, it doesn't have ground clearance. Like, why does it matter? Why does it matter? It doesn't matter. Like, the point is, it's a car and it's practical and it's performance oriented. I don't understand why people don't like it. Like, I love it. And it's basically everything a car should be, boiled down to its purest form. A car should be practical. A car should have performance. A car should be, stylish. A car should be powerful. And this is everything that a car should be, boiled down into its purest form. This is something that everybody should find some appeal in driving in the first place. I don't understand. And granted, this is only my opinion. And like I said, this is why car companies are not run by car enthusiasts like myself. They are run by economists. They are run by engineers. They are run by people with a more realistic mindset when it comes to cars. People want something like a Ford EcoSport, which is basically a lifted Ford Fiesta. People want that. People don't want a Chevy SS. People want a Subaru Outback. They don't want a Chevy SS. People want a Nissan Murano. They don't want a Chevy SS. They want the thing that is keeping up with the trend, that is keeping up with the times, that's going to make them fit in, and that's going to offer them some modicum of comfort, some modicum of reliability, and some modicum of utility. Even though it doesn't do any which one of those particularly well, but they want something that does a bit of everything, that can be fast if it needs to, that can go off the line if it needs to, that can do some light off-roading situations if it needs to. They want everything, even if they're not going to use it for all those functions. They just want to know that it can do that. And granted, I guess I kind of understand that, but for me, the crossover trend that is taking over the American car market is indicative of something that is sort of annoying. And I'm going to tell you why it's indicative of something that's sort of annoying. Crossovers don't do any particular thing particularly well. They just do them all good enough. They don't off-road particularly well. They do it good enough. They don't haul people in a comfortable manner particularly well. They just do it good enough. They are not the most practical vehicles. They are just practical enough. When you think of it, a crossover, and I have beef with the crossover. Yes, I understand this is about the Chevy SS. I understand that this is my thoughts on the Chevy SS. But I would be super dumb to think that the rise of crossovers, the love affair that some fools have with crossovers, which by some fools I'm talking about all car markets across the United States, and apparently in Australia too, they're experiencing the same foolishness. I would be a fool to think that the rise of the crossover and the love affair of the crossover has not played a role in the demise of the Chevy SS, which is probably one of the most amazing American cars ever built, even though it was technically not American, but one of the most amazing captive imports or American, or cars sold under an American brand. It's some superlative. One of the most amazing of which that was brought over to the United States and sold here. If it wasn't for the love affair that people had with crossovers, the Chevy SS could very well still be alive. Think of it. If you want a car to go off-road, get an actual off-road SUV. If you want your car to be super practical, get a station wagon or get a pickup truck. If you want your car to be comfortable, get a luxury sedan. If you want your car to be fast, get a sports car. Why do you feel that you need something that does a little bit of everything but doesn't do it, either of which particularly well? It's annoying. That's what it is. It's annoying. It's like everybody's just half doing it. Nobody's committing. It's like you're not committing to speed, you're not committing to comfort, you're not committing to off-road ability, you're not committing to utility, you're not committing to any of those. You're just wanting one thing that does everything a little bit good. You're indecisive. You don't know what you want. Because you don't know what you want, you settle for the crossover. Because on the days you're feeling more sporty, it can be sporty. On the days you're feeling more practical, it can be practical. On the days you're feeling off-roady, it can be somewhat off-roady. In the days that you're feeling this, it can be that. I mean, it's one of those cars, it just molds and it morphs to whatever you're feeling. And you know what? Those people are people who are indecisive. I have committed to wanting luxury with a bit of performance. So you know what I have? I have a Buick Park Avenue Ultra, and I am committing to that. Will I take my car off-road? No, because I don't want to go off-road. And even if I did, that's not the car to do it. Am I committing myself to being, a people hauler? No. Granted, my car seats 6. It seats 4 comfortably. 6 it's designed to sit, but it seats 4 comfortably. Am I committing myself to be a people hauler? Absolutely not. Am I committing myself to being a performance-oriented car? Absolutely not. I'm committing myself to wanting luxury above all else. That's why I bought a full-size Buick. People need to decide what they want and do that. Because the variety is being killed off in the car world today. I have beef with crossovers because they are killing the interesting cars. And I'm not just talking about sedans, because sedans are a lot more versatile. You can get a sedan that seats 6 people. Can you get one brand new? Not anymore, but there are still plenty of used ones on the market. You can get a sedan that is performance-oriented. Heck, goodness, you can even get a sedan that has an off-road bent to it. Is it going to be a sedan at that point? No, it's probably going to be a sort of lifted crossover, or a lifted wagon. But it's still built on the platform of a sedan. There's lots of things you could do with a sedan. When you go into crossover territory, I mean, there's only so much you can do with a crossover at that point. Yeah, you see performance crossovers, but at the end of the day, they are still crossovers. I mean, will the crossover market be as versatile as the sedan market once was? Probably, but by virtue of them being higher ground clearance and by virtue of them having higher centers of gravity, there's only so much you can do with a crossover. There's only so much you can do with a crossover at that point. Crossovers are great, but crossovers is only so much you can do about them. And because people have a love affair with crossovers and everything is just melding into one in the car world now, it's just a bunch of boring crossovers. You can have your flavor, but it's still a crossover at the end of the day. The Chevy SS has suffered. The Chevy Impala has suffered. Cars with a long, great legacy have suffered. The Lincoln Continental has suffered. The Buick LaCrosse has suffered. I'm just naming cars who have all died because of the rise of the crossovers. It's sad. It's sad. It is so sad. And do I see this trend reversing? Unfortunately not. It is what it is. And I'm sad that it happened while I was so young. Because as much as I like to drive cars from the late 90s, early to mid 2000s, which many car enthusiasts nowadays would tell you that was the best time for vehicles. Because they were modern enough to have safety features but not so modern that they got with all the unnecessary technological features that are coming with vehicles nowadays. That was the best time for automobiles. And right now, pardon me, oh dear, sneezing on a recording. Oh dear, so very sorry about that. Oh goodness, I'm going to have to do something about that. But anyway, apart from my sneezes, I am 23 years old. I just turned 23 last week. I am going to be moving on to a professional career. I'm going to have a family someday, and I'm going to get old. And I will no longer be able to drive cars that are almost as old as I am at this point. My car that I drive currently is a 2004 car. When the car was made, I was 6 years old. It is, granted, give or take, about as old as I am. And the design that the car was based off of, that the car was built in, is older than I am. It was made, they started making these Buicks like this in late 96, early 97. And then from 96 to 2005, for about 9 years, they produced them in this body style. So the car that I'm driving is actually older than I am as far as design and engineering goes. I know there will get to a point where I will no longer be able to drive cars that are from the same era of my birth. And I will get to a point where I can either choose to be impractical by driving a 40, 50-year-old car, or I can choose to be practical and modern and just go with what people are wanting that day. Because you will get to a point where car enthusiasts like me, unless we shell out an exorbitant amount of money, we won't be able to get the cars that we want anymore. Right now, the cars that we want are not so far removed from the cars that are present. But the farther and farther we go on with our lives, the harder and harder it's going to find cars that we find desirable to drive. And that's sad. And I feel like the decline of the Chevy SS is just a symptom to a larger problem. Car enthusiasts are losing the game in the car market. It's the regular, ill-informed populace of car consumers that are running the game now. So, I hate to end on such a gloomy note, but it is a reality. Pardon me for my sneezes, but this has been the GSMC Car Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Yeah, this has been it. So, yeah. Please follow us on Instagram, on social media, share us with your friends and your family. Tell people about us. And please stay tuned after the holidays for us to go back to our regular schedule. So thank you. Happy holidays and have a good night. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the GSMC Car Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed today's episode.